I set the beer at 10:31 for the shoot. No one's here.
Bamboo.
Hickory for the limbs.
Handle.
Takedown hardware.
Flemish twist bowstring.
Handle.
Dude, is this thing on? It's sick. Oh wait, there's some dust.
Is all you need
to build this bow.
Bamboo's a big weed. It's green.
I also wrote a book with infographics, detailed photos,
dimensions, diagrams,
everything you need as an instructional manual to build this bow.
Kaz!
I sourced all the materials, putting it together in a kit.
For your convenience.
You do not need this kit to build this bow.
You do not need this book to build this bow. You just need this video.
I'm hungry.
We hope you enjoyed the video.
This is a 3-piece wood takedown bow. I am super interested in making the best bows I can, and I am super interested in helping you make the best bow that you can. And after making hundreds of fiberglass bows, this is my favorite design that I've landed upon. That curiosity brought me to wonder if I could make the exact same bow design but with wood. This is a 3-piece wood takedown bow in the same design as my favorite fiberglass bow. I had to make a few modifications to make it work from wood. You see, there's 3 things we need to build: a riser and then 2 limbs. I've constructed this entire build so you can get all the materials for under $100, which is amazing. And as a matter of fact, you might even get it for less than that. So here's all the material you will need, and then next, let's start on the riser. First, you'll need some sort of material for the riser. It needs to be 3.5 inches tall, at least 14 inches long, and 1 3/4 inches thick. In this scenario, I'll take 2 boards and put them together. But the cool thing here is that if you have scrap wood like I do, you can add really cool accents and laminate it however you would like. But I do recommend a harder wood like hickory or ash, or there's a ton of exotic woods that I've built with that are harder. The reason is these limb bolts need to be strong enough to hold. So you're gonna screw an insert into the riser and the limb bolts need to be strong enough. I've tried a softer wood like a Spectraply, which is a bunch of like birch laminated together, and that was too soft. So I wouldn't use pine or poplar or anything that's super soft, but I would definitely recommend harder wood in the handle. The strongest and most perfect scenario, which isn't necessary, is to have laminations this way as well as a curved lamination this way. So the insert goes beneath the curved lamination and is inside 2 there. So it's technically within inside of 3 pieces of phenolic, which is really strong material. So with this type of riser, I'll test it later, but I think I can go up to near a 100-pound bow. Next, for the limbs, you'll want a piece of bamboo. This is a bamboo slat. Also, I'm gonna use a piece of hickory. In the last video, I made it from Osage. You could do this from many types of wood, but I would recommend hickory for the cheapest, quickest, easiest way. Then I've got 2 extra pieces of scrap wood for the fade outs from the handle into the limbs. I'm gonna use Typon 3 wood glue today. You could use EA40, but it's not necessary, as well as a pack of limb bolt hardware. You can accomplish this entire project with an assortment of hand tools. I'm not gonna just use hand tools today because speed's important to me so I can put out more videos, but I'll give you the alternative to the tool I'm using and what I would do if I were using hand tools. Don't let your tools limit yourself. You can be creative and figure it out. That's what I did when I first started bow making in an apartment. I started with just this and a pocket knife. I'm doing a 3.5 by 14, and then this is actually 2 inches thick, and I'll thin that down later. These spring clamps are super handy. They're not super expensive, and you can get like a 20-pack really cheap online, and you can use these for the limbs as well as the riser. I live in a super dry environment, so this wood will soak up the glue a ton. Therefore, I like to do what I call as a sizing coat. I'm gonna spread glue across the entire surface and let it sit for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna re-put glue on. And I'll time lapse this so you see how much the glue just soaks into this wood. Some people say this helps. Other people say it's been tested and proven it doesn't. But I think it does help with the premise of not having a dry joint. Now I put a ton of glue on, but if you look here closely, it's completely basically soaked all the way in a couple spots. So let's add a little bit more and then clamp it together. The key is no dry joint. Slap those together. And then let's clamp it down. We'll slide a little bit on the first couple. no biggie. As long as your boards are flat, it doesn't take much. So let's let that glue cure. In the meantime, we can work on the limbs. That's a cool part about the 3-piece takedown bow is there's pretty much always something to work on. Now this is a bamboo slat. It's crowned on the top and these are the nodes. I'm not really gonna pay attention to the nodes, not a super big deal today. But on this other side, we need to make it completely flat so we can marry together 2 pieces of wood. One's gonna be the hickory, one is the bamboo. It's technically a grass, forgive me. But we need them flat so that we can put them together. This is gonna add strength, a lot of strength. This is the magic sauce that allows the limb bolts to go in because this doesn't have grain like wood. It's more like a sponge. That allows the forces of the limb bolts to hold. If you just try this with plain hickory, I can almost guarantee that's gonna split out on you. This is the magic sauce. You can change the hickory to many other types of wood that are good under compression, but I would absolutely recommend to use bamboo. I'm gonna take this slat and hold it evenly on the belt sander and go back and forth until I get it completely flat. If I didn't have that massive belt sander, I'd use a smaller one like this or even one like this. I've recommended this Wen one a lot for beginners because it allows you to throw a belt on as well as spindles and it's really cheap. And for those who just have hand tools or just want to use hand tools, this is how I would do it. Take a cabinet scraper. It's like a $5 piece of metal. Sharpen it up. If you have a vise, it's really handy. What's happening is the cabinet scraper is touching on both sides, but not the middle yet. But it's a great way to remove the bamboo evenly. It's gonna take more work, but in about 30, 45 minutes, you can have this whole thing done. I'll get it down to flat so you can see what it's like. All right, now, if you take a look, you can see how I've worked all the way through. Now it's flat. Can be done with a scraper. Belt sander will save you a little bit of elbow grease as well as 30 minutes. I go on the edge of the belt sander. I use light pressure, not hard, light pressure, and always have the piece moving back and forth. If you use hard pressure or don't move the piece, it'll create a divot into your bamboo and then it will not have a clean glue up later. Always be moving, always nice, gentle, light pressure. I highly recommend using your fingers, and you can feel any part of the bamboo where there might be a dip. There's a little dip right there, I'll smooth that out. This is the best way to not have a bad glue joint. Your fingers can detect what your eyes can't see sometimes. So how thick should you leave it? Somewhere around 2/10 of an inch is gonna be pretty good for any bow between 30 and 60 pounds. I did build a 100-pound bow and I left that one a little thicker, closer to 1/4 inch, but depending on how steep your crown is, it can change. I'd recommend bringing it down to about 1/5 of an inch. Nodes, always a question. How evenly should I space them? Is that important? What should I think about there? Evenly spaced nodes makes tillering easier, but it doesn't necessarily make the bow perform better. We're having 32-inch limbs, so I'm gonna find an even distance between the nodes where I can go 32 inches on either side. Then I'll cut it there for each limb. The most important thing with this bow is that our limb bolts don't fall exactly where a node is. So you'll also hear there was a node right here, so I cut on just on that side of it so that the limb bolt's not where the node is, and then the first node is down here past the fade out. Same thing on this side. So from this node, I have 37 inches in one direction and I have 34 in the other direction. That's perfect. So I'll cut my line right on this node. This side connects to the riser. So I'll measure down 32 inches, make my mark and cut them both there. Bamboo is prepped. Now for the wedges. I've already cut these down to a decent size. We're at 8 inches long, that's important. And I've thinned them to 1/10 of an inch on the sander. So this piece will be this piece. It's a critical piece to work. It stays thick for these first 3 inches, and then it gradually, super gradually tapers and feathers into the limb. What this allows the bow to do is not to bend in this area. You'll see the total thickness is 3/4 of an inch right here, but at the end of the fade out, it's 1/2 inch. So this piece gives the strength we need here to not have it break. Therefore, I'll mark at the 3-inch mark, and I'll do the same on this limb. Don't touch this area. We want it flat. Also, don't touch the back. We want this side flat, but we want the bottom flat so that it stays flat along the core material. This is an exaggeration to show you what I'm trying to do. That's what the wedge is like. Flat on this side. Don't touch these first 3 inches. This is a properly feathered piece, and you can see how gentle this bends. It's paper thin and then comes back to our 1/10 of an inch. I forgot to mention that this type of material doesn't matter. I've tested fiberglass, I've tested bamboo, I've tested softwoods, I've tested hardwoods, I've tested all sorts of things. And I would choose the insert that gives you the look you want. So I thought it'd be cool to add a dark accent in these limbs. So I did walnut, and it's scrap I had. The riser's curing, the bamboo's ready to go, the fade outs are ready to go. Now it's time to work on the hickory. Hickory staves like this can be picked up online or at a hardware store. This one is so thick, we need to thin it down. I'm looking for a finish dimension of 4/10 of an inch on this hickory stave. So with this one, I'm gonna take to the bandsaw, cut it up the middle, and that should allow me to have 2 pieces. The reason I'm not leaving it this thick is because I want to add a little bit of reflex into this bow to help it shoot even better. So the limbs need to be thin enough that they can bend without breaking in the glue up process. Additionally, once it's split in half, that allows you to make 2 full bows out of this one $15, $20, $30 piece of wood. My favorite tools for flattening it after sawing it would be a drum sander. Most people may not have that, so a planer actually works really well, or just on the belt sander to prep it for the glue up, you can do that as well. Hand tools, of course, will work, but just take more time. Good news. Now we just need to cut this down to 32 inches to match the length of our bamboo. Something I've always done for bow making is to use a hacksaw because the teeth are so fine. It allows me to never have split out. And now we're back with our riser, our bamboo, our limb fade outs, and our hickory. That's all the pieces we need. Now it's time to glue it up. Here's how I do it. First, the better these pieces match up, the easier it's gonna go for you. So I'll place all of these down together and I'll line it up as good as I can and add some spring clamps. Now I can run this to the belt sander and true up the edges. I wanna add some reflex. So this is my setup. The blocks are 31 inches apart from the insides. This right here is 1 inch, and these ones right here are 2 inches tall. So that allows us to take our board after the glue's on it, and we can reflex this down just like that. And then we'll add our clamps. So this was what would be called a dry run. Everything's lined up. Make sure everything looks good. Now we just need to add the glue and do this again. First thing is when you're setting up the form here, you don't want these to move around because when you push the bow on it, it can move it. I'm putting the blocks at 31 inches apart, and then I'm going to screw them in from the bottom so they can't move. Now with our 1 inch block, we want it to be right in the middle. Now nothing's gonna move around on you and the glue up's gonna be much smoother. I do like to clean my pieces with acetone. Everything's cleaned up and ready to go. I will do a sizing coat first again, just an initial thin layer. After a minute or so, the final coat. I'm using Type-On 3 wood glue here. Any yellow wood glue works great. This one is supposed to be waterproof, so I guess that's a good thing. But I finish my bows anyway, so I don't necessarily need waterproof glue. Yes, you could use hide glue. You could use EA40. You could use Unibond. but wood glue is one of the best. I like to err with too much glue and too many clamps. All right, let's clamp it up. First, I'm just gonna lay it down, throw a clamp on. Awesome, okay, so that's starting to set together. Now we can go for the middle clamp. I think this is a spring clamp will be good enough there. There we go. And then I like to clean some of the squeeze out just to keep it clean. If you go ahead and get a rag and wipe the glue off before it hardens, it's gonna be a lot less cleanup later. I will add a little bit of a tighter clamp at the fade out and any place that looks like there could be a gap. The reason I'm using clamps rather than wrapping it in some sort of elastic is because wood glue needs air to cure. If you use EA40, you can wrap the entire piece in some sort of elastic or bike tire like this, and it'll cure based on the chemical reaction of the epoxies mixing. But if I were to wrap this in saran wrap or the bike tire, this glue would never cure. It really doesn't need to be overcomplicated. There are hundreds of ways to glue something up. You take the principle of, okay, these pieces need to be flat and they need to be pressurized. How can we do that? There's no right or wrong. It's fun to be creative and use the methods that you have. So let's do the other one the exact same. If we flip the script and say, what could we do to guarantee that this would fail? It gives us a frame of mind to figure out what we need to solve for before we glue up. Here's a few things to keep in mind or to implement so that the chance of failure goes down. Use your fingers. I know I already mentioned this, but really double check that this is very flat. The mistake is that if there's dips in your material, if they don't come together flat, then it's really hard to get a good glue up. And sometimes if you're not particular on the material prep, when you push it together, there's gaps just by holding it into place. And I'll mimic it. It could look like that. Now, if this is pushed, it's good. But just by barely touching the sander on a location you didn't want to, or putting too much pressure, you can end up with a large glue line. Also, the limb wedge. The most common place in the glue up where there's going to be a gap is going to be at the end of the fade out of the limb wedge for two reasons. One, you just don't have enough clamping pressure there. Two is because the featheredness, it's not feathered enough. So it's not gradual enough coming into the limb. So there's basically a steep angle there, and that's when it has a problem. And then with your glue, make sure you have enough glue. More clamps are better, and you will have a great glue up. All right, so I'm just here trying to shoot a little bit of B-roll for you guys, and I cannot get over how smooth this shoots. I built this one about 4 months ago, and it just blows my mind. It's like for an all wood bow to be shooting, like if I didn't know, I would be thinking I'm shooting a fiberglass bow. I'm just saying if the goal is smoothness, this is one to consider. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. Today I'm going to show you how to build a riser. My intention's been to lower the barrier to entry to bow making and archery for those who are interested. And with that mission, it's led me to do different forms of content to help people. This right here is video 3 of a 6 or 7 video series on how to build this awesome 3-piece wood takedown bow. Today we're covering riser profile and shaping. This book is the step-by-step with a ton of photos, infographics with measurements. It breaks it down to make it easy. Not necessary. You could build this bow from these videos. Want to give the option of both. Shatterproof Archery also has a kit of how to build this bow. Hey guys, great news. I got 1 limb, 2 limb curing. Now with the Type on 3, it only has to sit for an hour and then you can work with it. You just don't want to stress it for 24 hours. This has been sitting for 4 hours. So we're going to go ahead and take the riser and start building it as the limbs cure. I've tested out a bunch of different riser designs, and here's some. This one here, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. But this one is the one I really like. And we're carrying these principles to this. This one's the same as well. So I drew this to help you out. But you'll notice I've got some red lines and then 2 blue lines. We're gonna pay attention to the blue lines. On one side of our block, it's gonna be flat. And you'll see this bottom side, it'll be flat all the way across. So we can measure from this flat line. We're gonna come 1 inch up here, 1.5 inch up here. It's gonna be 3 inches along that bottom line where this mark comes up. That's gonna establish the proper angle for the limb to come off the riser. That's all the importance. 1.5, 1, 3. I have built this 2 different ways. One is with a 16-inch length. The other is with a 14-inch length. You can do whatever you would prefer. These shapes are up to you. Something I like to do is that the depth of the handle is gonna be in line with where the limb comes off the riser. So if you put a straight edge across, you'll see right coming into the depth of the handle is right where the limbs are coming out. That's gonna make sure that this style of bow is extra smooth. So we've got our block. Let's flatten one side first. 3 inches, 1, 1.5. The last thing I did not mention is where to make the center line. So at 7 inches, that's my center. I'm gonna go ahead and draw this across. What do we want the center to be? You could make the center the arrow shelf, but what works for the smoothest shooting bow is to make the center the deepest part of the throat of the handle. So I can take these marks like we discussed earlier, and now I know I want the handle deepest part to be right in there. And I'm okay with it going a little further that way, so I'll go about a 1/4 inch further in this way. Okay, so that is the deepest part of the handle, which means the arrow rest is gonna be above it, which means I'm just gonna kind of eyeball how I would want that handle to feel. Now, this might not look like anything to you, but let's bring this out this way because we're gonna have more of a forward-facing handle like that. These curves don't have to be precise. It's just personal preference, so you can take your time as you remove material. I've done this design so many times, I can eyeball it and I know what to look for and what to avoid. The other thing to notice on the layout is I purposely did this to where this chunk that's chipped out is over here, where I'm not gonna use that material. So take a look at your board, make sure if there is any imperfections or any knots you want to avoid, you want to take out this, this, and this. Now with your choice of tools, remove everything you need. Now here's an idea to make a cool looking riser, or at least a different looking riser. So I'm taking one of my hickory risers, but I'm going to torch it. Any propane torch will work. But before you torch it, it's important to get the riser to the exact shape you want, because we're not really going to change the shape after we darken it. How I do this is I go ahead and char the entire piece. And then after it's charred fairly dark, I will use 220 grit sandpaper to sand off as much as I want or as little as I want for the look I'm going for. This gives it a nice, unique look. I really like how it turns out, and it's a fun way to give a different look to a light colored material. So when shaping a riser, there's a wide variability of preferences, but one principle that I have found true for most people is that most of us like this to come backwards. That allows you to grab the riser and roll your wrist up a little bit and find that very comfortable. So with this style, we're having a forward-facing handle and we're rolling that backside over. Everything else, as far as the exact curvature here, is going to feel better depending on your hand size and how you grip the bow. Also, there's a point right in this area that a lot of people find at the meat of their thumb. If you got a big, meaty thumb, kind of like I do, it can indent there. So when I'm finishing the riser, I'll put my hand on it and really get a good feel of it. And sometimes I'll even string the bow and shoot it and see where there's undue pressure on my hand, where it's like, that doesn't feel the best. Then you just go in there with an orbital sander or a rasp to clean that up. And in the end, you end up with a really nice clean riser. Okay, we are making such good progress here, and now it's actually time to put the hardware in. I don't finish the handle completely, and I leave it a little bit bulky at this point, and the reason being is that after we get the limbs on, sometimes it's shifted off or whatever. What I like to do is leave it just about a 1/4 inch bulk, just a little bit wider than I want the finished dimension. Then when we get the limbs on, I can take that to the belt sander, to a hand sander, so that the limbs are completely true and flush with the riser. Then they match perfectly to that bow and look better in the end. Shatterproof sells these hardware kits individually, as well as in the bow making kit. But the kit consists of 2 threaded inserts, 2 pins, 2 washers, 2 limb bolts, and an Allen key to put it all together. For the limb bolts, I highly recommend building a template. This is how you do it. So for my template, I have the holes at 2 inches apart, and I have this pinhole 1/2 inch from the edge, which would put this 2.5 inches from the edge. But this makes it easy to put on both sides here, as well as on the limbs. I recently got this vise to make it easier to do takedown hardware. But if you don't have a drill press, place the riser in a vise and then find level. Once it's level, you can clamp it in, and then when you drill, just drill as straight as you can. A threaded insert will go on the side closest to the riser, and then we'll put the pin in on this side. With this kit, it's a 7/16 for the threaded insert. So let's do that first. Instead of setting the depth stop every time, I just use the tape method on the drill. Now for the pin, I use a 15/64. I find that this size allows me to drop it in easily, has a little tiny bit of play, but then I can just do a dab of CA glue when I get everything solidified and it'll stay in the riser. You can use a 7/32, but the downside to that is you kind of have to hammer it into place, and then it's really hard to get out, which is fine unless you need to make an adjustment. Future Kramer now, but I mentioned you can hand drill it, and I said try to keep it, just try to go straight in basically. And you may think, is that not precise enough? Well, hilariously, in that same video, I was drilling these in, and I didn't even line these up level at all. I don't know what I was doing. I was probably thinking about filming, but I put them like this. So if you drop a level on your board, you can adjust your riser, and that's gonna be best for best results. If the drilling angles don't match, then the pin just may not go in smoothly. Now you can countersink this a little bit if you want this lip to sink into the riser. I'm gonna add felt, so the felt's gonna be the same height of the lip, so I'm not going to do that on this one. These generally come with a little Allen wrench like this to thread them in. What I have done is take an angle grinder to one of the Allen keys. I put it in the drill, and then I'll just work it in and out. Nice and easy. Get a nice result like that. And then with the pin, it's gonna be a little snug, but slides in perfectly. But this allows me to pull it out if I need to adjust where it is later. I still have these limbs curing over here, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to do the pins. It's very much the same process, but the one big difference is that the bolt where the threaded insert goes is gonna be a different size. So this is where it's important to get the center, because if this is cattywampus at all, you will have off-center limbs. So I like to start with the template and get it as lined up as possible with my eyes, but that's not it. I'll always double check with calipers just to make sure something's not way off. So it should be the same from either side of the limb. And make sure your mark's the same on both sides, and that'll make sure it's not off. The main reason I say to make some type of template is I find that it's easier to get right. Since you're doing this on the limbs and on the riser, you're marking in 4 locations. And if you're using measurements 4 times, the possibility that it's slightly off is greater. But if you have two holes, even if your holes are not the exact locations that I said, they're gonna be the same to each other so that the limbs will fit. Here's another template, and you can see I hot glued a second piece on right there. And so with this template, I can drop it in and it's a hard stop. Mark your holes. It'd take about 3 minutes to make a template and probably save you an hour of headache later. Here are the measurements. I will say the limb bolt, you can go up in a size. It doesn't need to be that tight. Having just a slight bit of wiggle room in the limb is okay, because the pin is gonna keep it in line left to right. But what I'll do a lot of times is use the 21/64 and then use a reamer to just expand the hole slightly and then put the bolt in. Or you can just go one size up and drill bit. Now the one on the inside going towards your limb is for the pin, and we do not want to go all the way through the limb. Now, no matter how you're drilling this, I will go until my point of the drill bit comes through the other end. I'll stop and flip it around. That way we don't have tear out. So I haven't tested this yet, but if we did it properly, which I'm pretty confident we did, where's the pin at? There we go. The pin should drop in. Then you have the limb bolt, which should go right in. And then when you sight down it, it should look dead in line, which it does. So you repeat that on the other side. Lastly, since I originally started filming those, I started using these depth stops here on the drill press even, so I never have to set a depth stop. And I find that even better than that tape method. Just wanted to show you a cool tool that I've been liking. Limb bolts are on and everything, and I actually just filmed an entire section and scrapped it because I wanted to show you what you're probably or potentially gonna run into. So I purposefully created a problem. So now that our limb bolts are in, what we wanna do is see how straight our limbs are. And lots of times I'll grab a string, chalk line here, but using it just as a string. And you can go from center to center, and it's very obvious that this limb is like half an inch further that way than it needs to be. Don't know if you can pick that up through the camera, but this needs to be shifted this way. You want the string to be right in the middle of the bow. And this is a problem I encountered all the time when I started doing 3-piece bows. So let me show you how to fix it. It's actually a pretty easy fix, and it also doesn't hurt the bow at all. So that's why I wanted this pin easy to pull out. Boom. What we need to do is change the location of the pinhole. And by change the location, I mean move the hole 1/16 of an inch to the right. I've got a cutoff from the riser we'll do this with. The reason we can do this is because it's a locator pin. It's not structural. So we just need to move it so that the limbs locate every single time and are straight. Additionally, I'm gonna put felt to cover up where the old hole is. I do a piece like this. It has a nice taper and it is kind of cone shaped. Just a dowel, but that'll allow a really tight fit. You could drop it in with wood glue, but for a quicker turnaround time, I'll use some CA glue and accelerator. So CA glue into the hole, and then I'll put accelerator on this piece. Now, if you want to be particular, you can line up the grain the same way so it'll blend in even better. See, I sanded the top flat, and there we go, that's it. Now that accelerator takes 10 seconds to set up. And by using a piece of this same riser, one of the cutoffs, you can hardly see it's there. Now, I know I need to move it to the right slightly, so something shifted. I didn't get it lined up properly. Use a little scratch awl to pin exactly the spot I want. The interesting thing is, you're gonna be cutting out most of this dowel, but just a slight bit off to the side. Now, if you take a close look at this, you can see the tiny little bit of dowel that's still in there. But now this should adjust the limb to be straight. In less than 10 minutes, we fixed that, And that used to be like the biggest stressor with three-piece takedowns, is not getting this perfectly aligned. Now there's something you could potentially run into depending on how you shaped your riser. And that is that there's a gap between the riser and the limb. And that's because they're interfering with each other. So what I do is I round over the limb or the riser, you can do either one, to make them fit. It's generally just on that corner that can make this problem, but your alignment can look off if this is off. So double check that, round it over on a sander if you need to. Now from this point, I'll mark the center of each limb, then I'll measure 1/4 inch on either side because we're doing a continuous taper from 1/2 inch all the way down to 1.5 inches at the handle. After you sand off or cut off the excess, you have a really straight bow that is nice, perfectly continuously tapered. There is, however, a couple nuances to this. With this bow build, we glued the limbs up square, like full size, rather than pre-tapered. You see this one here is pre-tapered. The nice thing of leaving them wide is even if your alignment is just like slightly off, you might have enough width to still get a straight limb, and you'll just cut a little bit less off of one taper than the other. If you did a pre-taper like this, so it's tapered before you've done hardware, then it needs to be even more precise. To taper the limbs, a bandsaw works really quickly and really nicely. Doing it on a belt sander might even be safer. It'll take longer, but less chance of you messing up. The key with the taper is that you take extra time to make your marks on the back of the bow. And then when you're cutting it or sanding it out, you know whether you're going to your line or beyond your line. You see, if this is my bow limb, and I'm marking my taper out, what some people don't realize is that a Sharpie line's about 1/10 of an inch. So that means 2/10 of an inch or 1/5 when you multiply that by 2. So if you marked with a Sharpie and you haven't decided where you've marked, you could be 2/10 of an inch off by removing material. Because if you remove material up to the line, it's gonna be different than if you remove the line. So just plan ahead when you're marking out your bow, whether you're going to the line or cutting through the line. I used to do trim carpentry, and different people did it different ways. I think the cleanest look is to be able to set it up so you remove the line. I think that's visually, visually that's easier, and then you don't have any marks left on your piece after the fact. If you mark it out with a pen or pencil, it's gonna be much smaller of a line, but you can still be nearly up to 1/10 of an inch off without knowing how you're cutting it out. So once it's tapered, it should look something like this. The limbs are tapered, they're on the riser, and everything is looking clean and true. If you would like to sand this flat, you can add any type of material you would like to build a tip overlay up. But that's not necessary. Rather, this is how I'm gonna do it. Measure a 1/2 inch down, like so. Flip it to the other side, and measure 1¼ inches down. Then connect your 2 dots, and that's the line we're gonna put our string groove in. Now that everything's connected, got a chainsaw file here. I've all filed in about 3/4 the depth of the chainsaw file, which will equal the depth of a bowstring so that it's flush. But that's not it for this side. I want to take out this section. That way when we draw the bow back, the string has somewhere to go. Okay, now the string can freely move. Flip it around and repeat on this side. Okay, both sides are filed in. So it's functional now. Now we just clean it up and the rest is looks. With this style, I have 2 principles. One is no sharp edges, so little pieces of sandpaper like this to file the string grooves will be great. The second principle is don't cut all the way through the bamboo on the back. Besides that, feel free to style it however you like. Now, if you're going the tip overlay route, the biggest key is that these surfaces are flat when you glue it together. So I'll rub the limb on a belt sander onto the bamboo, and then I'll grab whatever material I want, make sure that's flat, and then just use wood glue to clamp these down. Once your tip overlays block is on, you can shape it just like the other method. The main difference though is that you can cut into the tip overlay quite a bit. So I'll cut into the back of it the same depth as I did the side so that the bowstring is inlaid into the limb. The creative freedom is endless with tip overlays. See, this one here is an old one I did, but this is a type of horn, and I thought it would look good to make it real pointy. It's fairly common practice to have the bottom one more round and the top one more pointy, And for traditional old self bows, that was so that you know which way's up and down. But here that's obvious because you've got an arrow rest and you're probably gonna write your poundage and things like that and sign it with your maker's mark. But on a single piece self bow like this, with the handle being uniform, you're like, oh boy, does it go this way? Does it go this way? Check the tip overlay. Oh, that's square, that's the bottom, the top's pointy. Feel free to take 10 minutes on the tip overlays or go nuts and just, I don't know, do something out of the box. It is less about the functionality and more about looks, especially with a bamboo backing. With that said, technically more mass will slow down the limbs, but it's very, very, very small amount with the amount of tip overlays we put on. If you were to do something larger, something wild, could slow down the limbs, but what I'm getting at is don't worry about the functionality with this bow. As far as the tip overlays go, make something that you would enjoy looking at or that fits your building needs right now. But if you do something unique like this, every time you look at it in the future, you're like, yeah, I'm glad I spent the time on that. That's a nice touch. Hey, here's some tools I recommend for this. If you like carving and have a Dremel tool, something like one of these, here are some bits that are the most useful. A bit like this can replace your chainsaw file. A sander like this can replace your rasp. And a flap wheel and a burnisher can replace sandpaper to a degree. And then finally, this roll of sandpaper is great. This sandpaper is really cheap, and the nice thing about it is you can roll it out, rip it if you're strong. Goodness gracious, that was harder to rip than I thought. But here it is. So you can rip a small piece here, see, small sliver, and it rips down vertically. So now you can grab this and file or create your own little inside the grooves. So this sandpaper is great. So those are the tools that I recommend. If you're doing it by hand, a fine tooth rasp or file, a chainsaw file, and some sandpaper, and a sandpaper roll. Here's some different tip overlays. This one's bamboo with clear fiberglass. This one's an Osage one. This one has Osage and fiberglass. Walnut fiberglass. That one's a mix of something. This one's unique and different. And this one's as plain as you can get because the red from the sealing the end is still there. This one's a sinew wrap because of the sinew on it, and it comes to a fine, fine point. Also, there's more variations up there. In the end, it's what makes it so fun is because even if you're making the same style of bow as somebody else, it is yours. You're building it, it's customized to you. And it makes it so cool. And the moment you shoot it for the first time is a experience that is one of the highest moments I've experienced, especially when it doesn't break and it shoots great and then you practice with it and you're like, this thing's awesome. I have tried every possible tillering method and I came up with one, and today I'm revealing to you what I call the magical tillering method. I wrote all about it in my book, and it's underwhelming because it's so easy to get a really good shooting bow. If you want to struggle in tillering, do it all by eye. Try to visualize what it should look like and then just slowly tweak it for a couple of days and you can get a great bow. But if you want guaranteed success, this is how to do it. My original idea around this method was how can we make this as easy as possible? And what I found out through some extensive testing is that where the bow rests with a string on it is the same how it bends with it pulled back with this design. What that means is we can do all the tillering right here at rest and we don't have to draw it. Now, once you remove wood, you must exercise the limbs to give it a new memory. Wood has a memory to it, and so if you just remove wood, nothing's gonna change. That's why you wanna pull it back 25 times or draw it on a tillering tree or tillering stick. But once it's exercised, you can retake your measurements. I've done this with multiple bows and found that if you're precise with those measurements and you have your positive tiller at its brace height, it's gonna shoot good. Now with this style, it'll be like a 67 or 68 inch bowstring. With this design, here's the one that I've completely finished already. It has a 1/2 inch limb thickness in the center of the limb, and that is a 48-pound bow. Just as a rough rule, keep it above a 1/2 inch if you want more than 50 pounds, below 1/2 inch for less. But tillering is gonna be a little different here. I'm gonna tiller by using some measurements. Okay, so here's the setup. I'm gonna go every 5 inches, and I'm gonna put it in the same slot. So 5 inches, and then we'll go out to 10, we'll go out to 15, and we'll go out to 20. Then we'll repeat that on the other limb. From here, I'm gonna measure on the 5 inch mark, Now you want to be on the exact spot. So I put the left end of the tape measure on the inside, and then I'll go to the inside of this mark as well so that you're in the same spot. But here I've got, and you want to be precise, 5 and 9/16. And here I've got on the inside 5 and 7/16. Okay, so that right there at the 5-inch mark is telling me I have a negative tiller. I'll continue on with each mark. And what I'm looking for is that the marks are the same all the way along. Once I get it the same all the way along, I'll adjust the upper limb only. If it's the same at the 5, but it's not the same at the 20, the stiffer limb just needs material removed near that 20-inch mark. As you may know, my tool of choice is my cabinet scraper, low quality one that I've had for 12 years, but you can just resharpen it forever. The one thing to pay attention to is the left and right side of your limb to make sure you're removing material evenly. So the most precise way is calipers, 0.47, 0.45. That's pretty close, but what I can do is just tilt this slightly to knock down more of the side with 0.47 and keep those even. It's not too difficult to get 1/10 or 20 thou off, and then you can start having some limb twist problems. And if you don't have calipers, you can use a tape measure, but I will say I found this one on Amazon. It's like $4, and it's good enough to measure this stuff. It doesn't have the nice features of the metal ones where you can lock it in place, all that, but just to check stuff and just have I bought 4 of them so I can just have them everywhere and I always have them on hand. I found that to be useful. And then I keep my nice pair for when I'm doing super precision stuff. My limb was bending evenly throughout. It was just needing more off this limb. So I'm doing full passes. Then you end up with these good guys. 20 passes later, let's test it again. I built out this tillering tree, but you can also do it with a tillering stick. This is a 2x4 with some screws screwed in, and you do the same thing. I actually really enjoy using, screw it right into the workbench, and then you can put your bow up here, and then when you pull it along the screws, it stays in place. This is looking good. It's not supposed to be an even bend like a normal self bow, I guess. Because of the reflex, it's not gonna visually look like a typical bend. That's where the math really helps, because it'll look like it's bending less in the middle where we reflexed it the most. And that's okay. I think that helps with the speed to fling the tips forward further and sooner. So the thickness of the limbs, as well as this distance, is gonna matter more for you. Before you retake your measurements, you wanna exercise the limbs, which is just gonna be drawing it. You can do it like that. You can grab it and pull it. You can also put it over here and draw it down. I fully expect some people who will build this will probably have a setup like this, get it dialed in, using their calipers, checking everything, spend 2 days on the tillering to get it perfect, where there's gonna be other people who take this to a belt sander and do the entire tillering on the belt sander and call it good. Not one way is better than the other. I do both depending on the bow I'm making and depending on my goals for the bow, but I'd like to present you many different options so that you can make it your own. But because we kept the limbs pretty even the entire way, and because of the 8-inch fade out, we have a natural tiller in the bow already. Mostly we just need to remove wood on the outside. Okay, so 45 pounds at like 21 inches. I want to remove some more material, but it's looking really good. Okay, sweet. 2 minutes of removing wood gave me slightly positive tiller actually. We've got some good news. It's tillered really nicely. So here's a sneak peek shot. The handle's still terrible as far as not being finished out yet. So we'll do that. But I like to shoot it as soon as I can. To finish out the handle, I'm gonna round the shelf so the arrow only touches in one spot. I'm also going to round this a little bit more, smooth everything out, get it feeling proper in my hand. Proper is personal opinion, but is how I like it at least. We'll do final sanding. The back of the bamboo, you can lightly sand that to make it smooth and look how you would like it to. I'm gonna round over the corners gently and sand everything down. Then I'll do maker's mark, spray finish, Now that you have the positive tiller, the final step is to shoot your bow. And if it shoots smooth and it checks out and you like it, you're done. If not, double check your measurements, exercise the limbs, and retiller it as needed. Okay, for finishing the bow. I'm not gonna go super deep here. YouTube, Kramer Ammons finishing a bow or refinishing a bow, and you will see some videos dedicated just to finishing. But the simplest thing to do is just to get a spray-on polyurethane. Just get a can of this stuff and spray the bow. That's the simplest way. The idea is you want to use finishes that are good on high contact. You want to use something that's waterproof, and it's basically any other type of wood finish. Additionally, you can write on the bow what you want. I often will write the draw weight. I'll do it at the draw length. So this one is 48 pounds at 28 inches. And then I do my signature. You can also put on the AMO if you want, which is for a long bow going to be 3 inches longer than the string. So technically this would have a 71-inch AMO with a 68-inch bowstring. Now in the next video, we're going to shoot this thing, but I do want to say a big thank you to everyone who's picked up my book so far. And if you're building this bow, thank you so much. A 5-star review on this book would mean a lot to me if it's adding the value that you expected. All right, I'll see you guys on the range.
You don't need this book to build this bow.
Yes, you do.
You don't need this
yes.
book to build
You need
this
the book.
bow, and you don't.
You need the book.
But you just.
Yes, you do.
You just need to watch.
All
this
you need is
video.
the book.
You just need to watch this video.